Before you can expect any woman to choose you, to genuinely want to be part of your life, you have to ask yourself a fundamental question: have I chosen myself? Because no one will truly choose a man who hasn't made a conscious, deliberate choice to become the kind of man he himself would admire. This is where it all begins. Not with tricks, not with tactics, not with impressing her, but with mastering your inner world. Until you do that, everything else is just noise. We live in a culture that pushes men to perform rather than to transform. It tells you to get the car, the suit, the perfect body, the income level. But women are not falling in love with a checklist. They're attuned to something far more primal, more intuitive. Your inner state. They don't fall for what you have, they fall for how you live. They respond to how grounded, how whole, how emotionally congruent you are. In fact, the kind of woman worth attracting will be deeply allergic to anything that smells like overcompensation, insecurity, or neediness. That's why this first step, mastering your inner world, is not just important, it's non-negotiable. And let's be clear, inner mastery doesn't mean you have no flaws. It means you're honest with yourself about your flaws. It means you know what drives you, what scares you, what triggers you, and you're not running from it. Most men either avoid this level of self-inquiry or postpone it indefinitely, thinking external success will cover for it. But no woman can give you the validation you refuse to give yourself. If you don't feel secure within, if you don't carry a sense of personal worth and direction, then all you'll do in a relationship is lean on her. And when a woman feels you leaning emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, before she feels your strength, she loses attraction at a core level. To master your inner world, you have to develop a deep sense of identity that isn't reactive. You're not moved by every emotional wave. You're not thrown off course by every moment of silence. You're not swayed by whether she texts back in 5 minutes or 5 hours. Instead, you have clarity about your values, your mission, and your emotional responses. You operate from internal regulation, not external feedback. And when you can do that, when you can live from a place of grounded presence, something powerful happens. You stop seeking permission to be enough. You stop chasing her attention. And paradoxically, that's often when you start attracting it. It's also crucial to understand that presence is power. Not loud presence, not dominating the room, but the kind of calm, quiet presence that makes people feel safe around you. When a woman feels that you're not trying to impress her, but that you're simply there, one, grounded in your body, engaged in the moment, unconcerned with outcome, she notices. Why? Because it's rare. Because it speaks of a man who doesn't need to be chosen to validate his worth. He already knows who he is. And that kind of man is immensely attractive. Not just romantically, but universally. This is also where purpose enters the picture. A man without purpose is like a compass without north. He spins, reacts, adapts, pleases, avoids, conforms. But a man with purpose has a deeper gravitational pull. He isn't easily swayed because he's anchored in something bigger than momentary emotion or fleeting connection. And here's the truth: women instinctively respond to a man on purpose. It gives your presence weight. It communicates that your life is already full and that her presence in it would be a gift, not a requirement. That distinction is everything. Now, the work of mastering your inner world is not a one-time event. It's a daily discipline. It's how you speak to yourself in private. It's how you respond to failure. It's how you handle boredom, rejection, discomfort. It's whether you abandon yourself when things get hard or whether you stay with yourself like you would stay with someone you deeply respect. This is emotional integrity. And this, more than anything else, will determine not just who chooses you, but who stays. If you're looking for quick fixes or emotional shortcuts, you'll always end up confused and exhausted, because the real game is not in making her choose you. It's in becoming the man she cannot help but notice. A man whose very energy suggests stability, direction, and emotional depth. The kind of man who can walk away when something isn't aligned, not because he's arrogant, but because he's loyal to his inner compass. That's the man who changes the room just by walking into it. That's the man who doesn't just get chosen. He gets remembered. So start there, not with her, but with you. Because once you become the kind of man who truly chooses himself, who embodies clarity, strength, and emotional presence, you'll stop worrying about whether she'll choose you. You'll already know that if she's the right one, she will. And if she doesn't, you'll be too grounded to chase what isn't meant for you. The man who has chosen himself never needs to beg to be chosen again. Most men approach women like they're solving a puzzle on paper, logical, structured, predictable. But attraction doesn't operate on logic. It doesn't respond to formulas, lists, or strategies. It responds to emotional resonance. If you want her to choose you, you have to stop engaging with her surface and start understanding her emotional blueprint, the unspoken patterns that govern how she feels, reacts, connects, and ultimately chooses. Too often, we're conditioned to look for compatibility by asking superficial questions. What does she like? What are her hobbies? What's her type? These are external details. They might help you hold a conversation, but they don't create connection. What creates connection is when a woman feels seen beneath the mask. When she senses that you can perceive her emotional rhythms, her fears, her desires, her inner contradictions, even before she articulates them. That's when she begins to trust. That's when she begins to soften. And that's when she begins to choose, not with her mind, but with her emotional body. Understanding a woman at this level requires a very different skill than charm or confidence. It requires presence, deep presence. You have to listen in a way most people never do, not just to her words, but to her silences. You have to observe how her energy changes in certain moments, how she lights up when something matters to her, how she withdraws when something feels unsafe. You must stop trying to get something from her and start becoming a student of her emotional world, not to manipulate, but to connect. Not to impress, but to understand. There's a psychological principle worth grasping here. Women feel emotionally attracted to men who demonstrate emotional attunement. This means you're not just aware of your own emotions, but capable of noticing, interpreting, and responding to hers in a way that creates emotional safety. Safety doesn't mean being passive. It means being consistent, grounded, and sensitive to the nuances of her internal experience. When a woman feels emotionally safe around you, she can open up in ways she doesn't around others. And that opening is what creates real, lasting desire. But here's the challenge. Many men short-circuit this process by focusing too much on their performance. They're too busy trying to appear interesting, clever, or desirable. They miss the opportunity to tune in. Because tuning in requires you to let go of your agenda. It requires you to stop rehearsing what to say next and start really observing what she's feeling right now. And when you can do that, when you can reflect her emotions back to her, validate her without judgment, challenge her when necessary without attacking, that's when she feels, maybe for the first time, that a man really gets her. And let me be clear, getting her doesn't mean always agreeing. It doesn't mean pandering. It means having the emotional intelligence to sense when she's speaking from her heart versus when she's speaking from her wounds, and knowing how to respond to both with maturity. Sometimes the most attractive thing a man can do is hold space for a woman's emotional intensity without trying to fix it. Not because he's indifferent, but because he respects her emotional process and knows his role is to witness, not control. When you understand her emotional blueprint, you also start to see that every woman, no matter how confident or independent, carries a unique set of emotional needs. Some crave reassurance, others seek freedom. Some fear abandonment, others fear losing themselves. These patterns often stem from childhood, past relationships, or cultural programming. Your role isn't to diagnose or dissect her, but to recognize what's true for her and meet it with emotional responsibility, not to become her therapist, but to be a partner who relates to her humanity, not her mask. The irony here is that the more deeply you understand her emotions, the less you'll need to say. Your presence will speak. Your responses will feel intuitive, not rehearsed. And she will start to associate you, not with anxiety, confusion, or performance, but with peace, clarity, and emotional depth. And that's what makes a man unforgettable. Because in a world full of noise, a man who truly listens becomes magnetic. This kind of understanding doesn't come from pickup lines or strategy. It comes from slowing down, from actually caring, from being interested not just in how she looks or what she does, but in what she feels when no one's watching. When you become the man who can navigate her emotional terrain with sensitivity and strength, she stops questioning whether she should choose you. Her body will decide for her, because women don't fall in love with ideas. They fall in love with how you make them feel. So don't waste time trying to solve her like a problem. Understand her like a world. If you can see her, really see her, not as a prize to win, but as a person to understand, you'll stand out in a way no surface level charm ever could. The man who makes her feel emotionally seen will always be the one she remembers, and the one she chooses. One of the most common traps men fall into when trying to earn a woman's attention or affection is slipping into performance mode. It's subtle, often unconscious. You try to be extra funny, overly agreeable, more impressive than you naturally are, you become the version of yourself you think she wants. But the paradox is this: the more you try to impress, the less she feels emotionally impacted. Attraction doesn't come from performance, it comes from presence, congruence, and the courage to show up as you are with nothing to prove and nothing to hide. Every time you put on a mask, trying to be cool, trying to sound wise, trying to appear confident, you're actually sending a signal that you don't fully trust yourself. And women can feel that, not just consciously, but viscerally. They're deeply intuitive about these things. When something feels off, forced or fabricated, it creates a subtle emotional dissonance. Even if they can't explain it, they lose interest. Why? Because you're no longer with her in the moment. You're in your head, editing yourself, managing perceptions, playing a role. And no one falls in love with a performance. They fall in love with the person behind it. To shift this dynamic, you have to stop trying to be what you think will be liked and start becoming a man who speaks and acts from inner alignment. That means saying what you actually think, even if it's not perfectly smooth. It means showing your real personality, quirks, contradictions, and all, instead of curating an idealized version of yourself. It means being willing to be misunderstood, not because you want to push people away, but because you're done filtering your truth to earn temporary approval. This is what creates emotional impact. Not the act, not the polish, but the authenticity. There's something unforgettable about a man who doesn't flinch at awkward silences, who doesn't rush to fill space with noise, who speaks not to impress but to connect. He doesn't need to dominate a room to be powerful. His power is quiet, rooted. You feel it in the way he listens. You see it in the way he carries himself. It's not arrogance, it's internal congruence. And that's what makes people pause, notice, and remember. Emotional impact also comes from your willingness to challenge, not in an aggressive way, but in a truthful way. Most men avoid disagreement out of fear of offending, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as difficult. But a woman doesn't want a man who agrees with everything she says. She wants a man who thinks independently, who respects her enough to be honest, even when it's uncomfortable. When you have the courage to disagree without being disrespectful, to stand firm without becoming defensive, you show her something rare: strength without control. This is what builds trust. And trust builds attraction. It's worth saying here that being real doesn't mean being careless. Authenticity without emotional intelligence becomes recklessness. The goal isn't to blurt out your every thought or emotion without considering the context. It's to be emotionally honest while remaining attuned to the dynamic you're in. You can be bold and kind at the same time. You can be assertive without being hostile. The point is to remove the layers of artificiality so that what she experiences is the real you, grounded, thoughtful, and unapologetically whole. There's a deep philosophical truth that many overlook: the more you need to be liked, the less you are felt. The man who is always performing, always managing impressions, is like a mirror. He reflects back what people want to see, but he never becomes real in their eyes. On the other hand, the man who's willing to be seen without armor becomes a presence. And presence leaves an emotional imprint. She may not even know why she keeps thinking about you, but something in her nervous system remembers how real you felt. That's emotional impact. Let me make something clear. This doesn't mean you'll always get the girl, but it does mean that if and when she chooses you, she'll be choosing someone she knows at a deeper level. And that matters more than short-term validation, because you don't just want to be picked. You want to be known and still chosen. That only happens when you lead with authenticity, not performance. And if you're afraid that being your true self won't be enough, that fear needs to be confronted, not masked. Because the truth is, every time you abandon yourself to gain someone else's approval, you reinforce the belief that your real self isn't worthy. That belief is a silent poison in every interaction. But when you start practicing radical self-respect, by showing up without pretense, by speaking your truth, by refusing to chase, you begin to rewire that belief. And you begin to attract people who resonate with your truth, not your mask. In the end, you have to decide what kind of impact you want to make. Do you want to be entertaining or unforgettable? Do you want to be liked quickly or respected deeply? When you stop performing and start living and speaking from truth, you may lose some attention, but you'll gain something far more powerful: resonance. And that's what makes a woman not just notice you, but feel you long after the conversation is over. The man who dares to be real in a world of performers becomes a mirror to her soul. and that's the man she chooses. When we talk about attraction, we often focus on charisma, communication, chemistry, but at the deepest level, what draws a woman toward a man and makes her want to stay is a sense that he knows where he's going, that he's not just moving through life reacting to circumstances, but leading with vision, clarity, and emotional responsibility. A woman wants to feel like she's stepping into a current, not dragging someone through the mud. And yet, this kind of leadership is misunderstood by many men. They confuse leadership with control, direction with domination. But real leadership isn't about controlling the dance. It's about creating a rhythm so compelling, she naturally wants to follow. Think about it this way. A man rooted in purpose becomes like gravity. He doesn't pull forcefully. He doesn't need to convince or manipulate. His direction, his clarity, his steadiness, these qualities create a pull that feels both safe and compelling. And in contrast to that, most men either lean too far back, passive, indecisive, overly accommodating, or they push too far forward, becoming rigid, forceful, or controlling. Neither extreme creates lasting attraction. What you need is centered, embodied leadership, where you guide with strength and openness, assertiveness and receptivity, direction and respect. The truth is, women respond deeply to a man who can lead, not because she's weak, but because polarity is essential to desire. Masculine energy is directional, structured, intentional. Feminine energy is fluid, expressive, receptive. When a man steps fully into his direction, it allows a woman to relax into her own nature. But if you lack clarity, she will unconsciously fill the void. And when she starts leading emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, because you won't, the dynamic collapses. She becomes anxious, he becomes resentful, and attraction quietly dies. Leadership, then, is not about being the boss. It's about being the emotional and directional center of gravity in your own life. To lead effectively, you must first lead yourself. You can't offer emotional safety to someone else if you're constantly avoiding your own emotional reality. You can't invite someone into your life path if you haven't defined it yet. This is why self-mastery and self-leadership are prerequisites to relational leadership. A woman chooses a man not because he makes her feel less powerful, but because his power makes her feel more free. Free to trust, to open, to express, to relax. That level of freedom only emerges when she senses that you've done your inner work, that you're not leading from ego, but from presence. What does this look like in practical terms? It means you make decisions with clarity and invite her into your world with respect. You initiate plans, take responsibility for your communication, and set the tone emotionally. You're the one who says, let's talk. When tension arises, not the one who disappears and waits for her to repair things. You say what you want, not to impose it, but to give her something real to respond to. You don't try to dominate her freedom. You create the kind of life that makes her want to be part of it. There's an elegance to this kind of leadership. It's not loud. It's not performative. It doesn't seek control. It's expressed in the calm you bring to conflict, in the intention behind your words, in the steadiness of your actions over time. When you lead in this way, a woman stops questioning your reliability. She stops needing to manage the emotional tone of the relationship. She stops testing your strength. Not because she's afraid to, but because she no longer needs to. She feels safe, not just physically or financially, but energetically, emotionally, spiritually. It's also important to understand that real leadership requires listening. You must lead with her, not over her. That means taking her thoughts seriously, considering her feelings without dismissing them, and staying open to being challenged. A man who can't be influenced is not strong, he's fragile. A real leader doesn't fear feedback, he integrates it. And when a woman sees that her voice matters to you, that her insights shape your decisions, not because you're dependent, but because you're wise enough to collaborate, she feels valued. And when a woman feels valued, her loyalty deepens. This form of relational leadership is rare because it demands a great deal of inner work. It requires you to be emotionally literate, spiritually grounded, and mentally focused. But when you embody it, you stop competing for attention. You stand apart, not because you're louder, but because you're clearer. And clarity, true masculine clarity, is magnetic. It cuts through confusion. It calms down, it creates direction. And in a world that is constantly pulling people in 1,000 directions, direction is deeply attractive. So if you want to be the man she chooses, stop asking, what does she want me to be? And start asking, what life am I leading? And is it worth inviting some